Great. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to get started again. Thank you so much for coming to the Tailored for Success Career Panel, our Lunch and Learn today, which we will feature professionals from McKinsey & Company. And we are so happy to have them today. Just in case you are unfamiliar with Tailored for Success, Tailored for Success is a nonprofit organization that has been working with job seekers since 2000. I'm the founder and executive director, and we routinely have these lunch and learns and virtual career development workshops to help job seekers. And we're also very, very happy when we can get working professionals to come and share their knowledge with job seekers, because I think that that is really, really valuable. And it's also a great networking opportunity. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the moderator for today's career panel, Madison Mahoney from McKinsey & Company, who I've been working with over the last month or so to put this together. And Madison, I'm so happy to have you. I've given you sharing ability, and the floor is yours.
Awesome. It's great to meet all of you. I'm Madison. I work at McKinsey. I've been here for about 2 years. To give a little bit of an overview about McKinsey, we're a global consulting firm. So we have offices across the world. One of our offices is in Boston. All of the colleagues on this call who will be speaking today are based out of our Boston office, but we regularly travel to support clients just all over the country and sometimes in different countries, depending on the project that we're working on. Broadly, what we do as a consulting firm is we support clients as they're working towards solving specific problems that manifests in a lot of different ways. And so we have folks on the call who can kind of speak to some of the products that we develop and solutions that we build for these clients. Sometimes it's thinking through strategies with these clients that we're working for. And our work spans basically any industry you can think of. So I do a lot of my work in healthcare, but some people do work in renewables. Other people do work in consumer goods, think like retail, the stuff you do when you go shopping, or software. So we do all kinds of stuff. That is to say, if there's any industry that you're particularly interested in, we might not all have like specific expertise in it, but McKinsey probably does something there. So that's kind of just an intro about us as a company. I'm not going to be sharing anything on my screen today. I kind of just want this to be more of an open type of panel conversation. We have a few colleagues on the call. I would love for them to introduce themselves. I'll start and then I'll pass it to somebody else. So just again, as a quick intro, I'm Madison, based out of our Boston office. I'm what's called a specialist at McKinsey. I do all of my work in healthcare, and so I'm specialized in healthcare, and I support clients that usually look something like hospitals or health systems, doctors' offices. Those are the people that I typically work with to help support their kind of strategies and what they're trying to do. So maybe I'll pass it to Neffin.
Sure. Thanks, Madison. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm Neffin Meissner. I work out of McKinsey Boston as a senior recruiter. And so I look at myself as kind of a matchmaker, right? Finding people who want jobs at the firm and helping them find their fit, and helping our firm find the right people for the roles that we're hiring for. I've been with McKinsey for 2 years now. And prior to this, I had a background working in higher education. So super excited to be here today. I think, Christine, I can pass it to you.
Thanks, Neffin. Hi, I'm Christine. I do product marketing within our firm's technology department. We call it the tech ecosystem here. So I'm also a more internal colleague working internally within our tech product teams, and kind of help them think about the strategies of how to bring tech products to our very large firm. I believe there's a little over 40,000 of us employed at the firm these days. So thinking how we can communicate these changes, especially if there's a tool someone's already using and we're moving to a new one. And just kind of really, it's a great combination of marketing, communications, project management, stakeholder management, and just kind of bringing people together to problem solve. And I've been with the firm for a little over 4 years now, and time flies. I will pass it to Yuling.
Hi, I'm Yuling, and I'm part of the data COC under McKinsey Digital, and I specialize in data and data strategy and data transformation. So I support organizations and enterprises across industries. We do assessment of their data maturity and also development of data strategies and roadmaps. Our goal is always to help those organizations and enterprises to better utilize data as an asset to reach their business objectives. It's nice to be here and looking forward to talking to all of you. And I'll just pass this to Claire.
I knew you're gonna pass it to me. You're my best friend before I transferred to McKinsey Boston. So what I do here, I'm also on the expert track. I joined actually through a company that got acquired by McKinsey. So I kind of have a very different path here. Not sure how much of it is actually applicable. However, I do sit on very interesting topics featuring sustainability, more like economic development work from our shape, basically the government practice. And social sector practice, and lastly advanced manufacturing, which is more on cars, batteries, hydrogen vehicles, etc. So my intersection there is that I develop strategies for all these different companies to basically start a new venture or enter into a market, help them to pick out what product they want to target, what market they want to enter based on that product response. And lastly, I think a lot of it is like how to set up their factory, how to train their workers, develop plans to run the factory well, to hit their production target. And then on the flip side, I actually also help government. For example, one of the work I think we can disclose because it's already public is that we help the Miami to basically get the funding from the federal government so that they can set up climate hub where they advance, for example, clean cement, like seawalls of the constructions and startup cluster there to help to basically transition their workforce and help to protect the city at the same time.
Very cool. Awesome. Thank you to everyone for introducing themselves. So those are all of our McKinsey folks on the call. Just to give kind of an overview of the next hour. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time doing quick introductions. We're going to spend roughly a half an hour doing a Q&A. I've prepared some questions for these panelists just based on everybody's expertise. I think they have some interesting thoughts to share. And then we'll have 15 to 20 minutes at the end for any questions that you might have. And as you ask your questions, would love for you to introduce yourself and kind of give us some background on what you're currently doing. So to get started, the topic of today's conversation is largely going to be storytelling in interviews. So while we all do all different kinds of work at McKinsey, we all interviewed to get jobs here. And one of the really interesting things about McKinsey's interviewing process is it's just unique. So rather than being your standard behavioral questions, when I say behavioral, tell me about yourself, walk me through your resume, what's your greatest strength, what's a weakness? Those are more broad behavioral questions. At McKinsey, we ask candidates to kind of tell us a story about a process that they've taken to overcome some type of challenge or navigate some type of situation. So for example, we'll ask them questions about times when they had to step into a leadership position, for example, or tell us about a time where you had to navigate some significant change at work or at school when we're interviewing college students. And we asked them to kind of tell us a story, essentially. We asked them to walk us through what was going on, what was happening, what they did, how they responded, how other people reacted. We asked them for a lot of details. We kind of want to really understand this narrative arc of what was going on at the time. And so I wanted to actually kick off this panel by asking Neffin a question, which is, we ask candidates to share these personal experiences, and we asked them to kind of talk us through challenges, goals, and actions they took to create change. How do you think that this type of storytelling can be applied to the job interview process more broadly? And when we actually think about just like the standard template resume, how can you think about applying this type of thinking to that type of layout? How, whether you're interviewing at McKinsey or whether you're interviewing anywhere, how can you think about incorporating storytelling into the job interview process?
Sure. I have one initial thought, which I think our interview process and the way in which we ask questions and encourage our candidates to answer them is very structured. We often talk about a pyramid principle, which is the idea of starting with a very high level key takeaway, and then drilling down into details. And so in that sense, I think whether you're interviewing with McKinsey or another company, it's best to kind of start at the end and share the impact that you achieved in the story you're about to tell, and then drill down with details from there. I think sometimes, and I'm guilty of this myself when I'm talking with friends, we can get kind of lost in the weeds and go on too long when talking about an experience. And I think it's important again to highlight kind of that impact, highlight the main takeaway, and then spend some time, digging through all the fun details that were part of the journey along the way. I think one thing too that is especially important is when you're describing your experiences, when you're working on your narrative, when you're practicing your storytelling, remember that it's not just about what you did, it's how you did it that really does matter. And I think that's where that behavioral component of a behavioral interview comes in. Let's say that, you're highlighting an example off of your resume where you helped your company cut costs by 10%. That's the what, that's what you achieved. Let's say though that then you're asked to share how you did that. The reason that I think a lot of companies want to know that how is they want to know, kind of the steps that you were taking, right? They want to see how you approach the problem. They also want to make sure that, you did achieve that impact while being a kind colleague, while being a caring colleague, et cetera. And so I think, again, the two takeaways with storytelling, it's important to start with the highlight and drill down. And then it's equally important to remember that the how is as important as the what. I'll pause there. I am caffeinated. I've had my large iced Dunkin', so hopefully didn't run on too long there.
No, I think that was super helpful. Anybody else? So Neffin is working on the recruiting side of things, which is a great perspective to have, can kind of weigh in and provide some of what we're looking for. Maybe Christine, how do you think about this from the candidate side of things? When you're thinking, I guess, when you think about your resume, how do you think about storytelling through your experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll share, I really had no idea what to expect when I was interviewing here, because as I mentioned, I kind of interviewed on more of the internal side of the house, and even Googling, like, trying to figure out a little bit what the recruiting process was like for this specific company. I just couldn't really find a lot online. Even say for the department I was interviewing with, it had no online presence. So I had to kind of start thinking through like what my questions might look like when I eventually speak to members of the team, asking about team structure. And I think I even asked a question, say, where exactly does this team sit at the company? Because I just couldn't find anything. But I was nodding my head quite a bit when Neffin was speaking, because that was things I had to do, because my background was just so sporadic and kind of erratic really before coming here. I'd worked in communications, I'd worked in social media, I'd worked in account management, I worked in marketing, I worked in operations. And I was thinking, I'm like, well, this is really a product management job, a product marketing job at the end of the day. And what skills do I have and what projects have I done that, even though it may not have been in product marketing specifically, what have I done that kind of shows that, oh, I can lead a project from inception to completion while making an impact at a company. And one of those, which I kind of thought through looking at my resume and my past experience, was thinking through the time I helped implement a pricing change at a previous organization, where I not only had to kind of go through the pricing and looked at, okay, this is what's profitable, this is what is not profitable, kind of take those recommendations to leadership, get their buy-in, create a document that they could then present to our vendor we were working with to get approval. And then finally, how can I get our internal folks to adopt this solution? And I ended up creating a worksheet that my friends at the company they still use it 8 years later, to kind of help them price out the marketing programs that they were selling. So even though I wasn't creating a marketing program per se, I was really working to enact change in the organization, change behaviors in an organization, which at the end of the day was what my current job is asking me to do. So kind of thinking how I can take that previous experience and frame it to meet the current job experience, I think is really what helped me be successful in my interviews here. Because even though, like I said, I had only really had a year, 2 years of actual marketing experience before coming to my role here at McKinsey, I had done quite a bit of internal change management and internal process implementation that I think had very cross-applicable skills.
Awesome. Thank you, Christine. And Claire, I guess, so when you looked at the job you were applying for at McKinsey, how did you think about that job description and how did you kind of translate it to figuring out what about your resume would be relevant to Storytel?
Yeah, as I said, I actually joined through Fifth Economics. It's a firm originally based out of UK with a very small US presence. And based on the job description there, I actually found it quite similar to my previous job, which is also working as a sustainability economic analyst. What that entails is that basically for $1 spent in solar, how much GDP that would generate and how many jobs that will be supporting. So basically that's exactly what I did for my former internship at AECOM, which is also a large engineering firm and planning firm as well. The overlap there is actually insane. So I found that basically a very great connection to what the JD actually described. And we actually have overlapping clients I encountered after I joined McKinsey. So that was a very, I guess, a great coincidence and then a very straightforward overlap. However, that is to say my job right now doesn't really actually reflect what that job description is, given that, we always say, make your own McKinsey, and I did that. So I'm doing entirely different things now. So definitely expect, flexibility in the role that you have going forward.
A great point. One other thing I've thought about recently with job descriptions and interviews, I know there's a lot of buzz around tools like ChatGPT and Gemini and all of these different AI tools, right? Every time you search something on Google now, you get like a little recommended AI thing. And I've been trying to figure out how to use AI in a more helpful way to me. I think one interesting thing with job descriptions nowadays is you can always use tools like that to say, let me input this job description and think about what types of questions I would get asked as I was interviewing for this. So you can quite literally copy and paste something and paste into ChatGPT and say, if I was in a job interview for this position, what types of questions would you ask? I find those types of prompts are always helpful. Even when I think about what types of questions I would get asked during a presentation to a client, like I always try and anticipate what types of questions someone would ask me and then think about how to frame my experiences or my perspectives related to those as well. So that's a good way to kind of use some tools that I know are getting flashed all over the place right now. AI is a fun buzzword, but that's a way to make AI relevant to you, I think, at least. So another piece I wanted to talk about was some of the questions that are, more specifically asked in job interviews. I know, as I said at McKinsey, we do an interesting type of behavioral in that we ask people to story tell, and we're not so specifically asking little niche questions, but there's a couple of questions that I think in a more standard behavioral interview setting are thrown out. So one that, you've maybe heard is, interviewers might ask you, what's a weakness that you have, or what's a time that you failed, or what's a time that something went wrong and the outcome was not what you expected it to be. I wanted to ask you, Lynn, how would you think about answering a question where there almost seems to be a negative spin to it, but you want to be able to present it in a way that it, still adds to who you are as an interviewee?
Of course, that's a great question. I recently came across a take on interviews, which I really like. Basically, says interviews most of the times is a process of colleagues picking colleagues. So basically, you want to make sure that you're working with someone who's reliable and could deliver. So to make sure that when you're facing a challenging situation together, this person doesn't go, you know what, I don't know what to do, so I quit. So you want to avoid such situations. So the core idea, my own guiding principle, and I have a little two-step process that I prepare for my also my interview here at McKinsey is to first show that you have the self-awareness. Second, you have proactive management process of your so-called weakness. So basically is first, this is no big deal. Everybody might a little bit freak out under pressure. You might have this and that weakness, but you have a matching set of strategies that you know how to put into actions when you're facing such situations. So for example, the first step would be, that's exactly what I did for my interview here at McKinsey. First, I would say, yes, I've faced such situations and I've been in this and that type of environment, but I I have a series of steps that I would take usually to cope with this type of questions. And for example, and it's not a one size fits all type of approach. You can tailor it to the nature of your job. For example, if this job requires a lot of coordinations and a lot of teamwork, for me to deal with pressure, a major step would be to make sure that my collaborators, my colleagues, and I are constantly on the same page. So communication would be the key. So my way to deal with stress is to make sure that I let my team know where I am at right now and what is the potential bottleneck, what is my plan to solve this problem, and what kind of support I might need. So the point is to make sure that everybody knows you're aware that there is a thing going on, but you also know what to do and you know how to communicate with your team to gather support and provide support. So I don't think necessarily, questions fishing for a negative quality is a trap or anything. It's a great opportunity to show you have this level of self-awareness and you know how to deal with that type of question. So that's what I would do.
That makes a lot of sense. I do want to pause for 1 second. So we just had Anna join the call, who's one of our other colleagues at McKinsey. Anna, do you want to give a quick intro?
Sure, sounds good. So yeah, I've been with McKinsey for about 2.5 years. I started my my journey actually from being an interpreter. So my first work was not very related to finances, and then I switched to consulting. So my first workplace was McKinsey Moscow office, and then I had the rotation for 1 year in Australia, Europe, Singapore, and now I ended up in US. So I currently focus on basically the private equity clients due diligences. So either you buy a company or you sell a company, and mostly do healthcare and tech.
Very cool. So the question we were just chatting about, Anna, and I don't know if you would want to weigh in on this, is, sometimes in job interviews, you might get asked a question that almost seems like it's asking you to talk about some of your weaknesses, right? So someone might say, what's a weakness that you have? They're almost not negative qualities, but more negative qualities. Someone might say, what's a time that you made a mistake? What's a time that you, yeah, I don't know, that you demonstrated, what are your shortcomings almost? How do you think about answering those questions in interviews? What's your approach to doing that?
I typically sort of want to develop a rapport with this question, not just like give an answer. Wanna also like make sure that you're a human being and the interviewer is also a human being, and we all make the mistakes. And like you want to basically talk about the thing that actually happened at work, right? Or like with kind of during your studies, like something that is relevant. So and then be like clear that, okay, I acknowledged my mistake, and then what did I do to correct it? So mainly when I was preparing for my interviews, I actually focused very much on this like STAR principle of what was the action, what was the result, what was the goal. But during the interview itself, I realized that it's actually really important to like give yourself time to like really kind of live through this moment. Because as an interviewer, when I like interviewed people in McKinsey, I also remembered like this personal stories, and they're sometimes very touching. They sometimes like provoke like really like an emotional response from people who are listening to them. So give yourself a moment and just like go into the situation and explain the context on like why you made this mistake. Maybe it was like a lot of time pressure and you were just new at your job. Maybe it was like some personal matter that intervened. So like give yourself some time to explain what was the context and then focus on the resolution of the problem.
Well said. And another question I want to touch on that I think, at least for me, is always a completely dreaded question. And I want to pose this one to Neffin. So sometimes in interviews you're asked, just tell me a little bit about yourself. I think that question is always incredibly hard. It's even harder than walk me through your resume, although I think that one is really hard too. I'm always running through, what do I focus on? What do I talk about? What do they care about? What are they interested in? What's important to say? What's not important to say? What if I leave something off and they go, why did Madison leave that off? So Neffin, how do you think about answering that question when you're asked that in an interview setting?
Yeah, it's a question that even I, as a recruiter and interviewer, dread myself. And so I just want to name that it is stressful, right, to have that question asked and be put on the spot to talk about yourself in such a general way. I think a couple of things to keep in mind. First is that when you answer the question, you should be sincere and authentic. I think here at McKinsey, for example, we serve a really diverse set of clients. We have a really diverse set of colleagues, and so not everyone is the same. And so it is okay, right, to be yourself and kind of frame your answer in a very personal way. I think when answering, it's also important to start again with that high-level highlight that directly answers the question. So for example, when I am asked in interviews to tell people about myself, I say that I'm a people person who enjoys helping individuals and organizations connect with good talent. And then I will drill down from there. I think the final point to kind of illustrate this point too is to be brief. I think sometimes once you start talking, you can get kind of caught up in kind of explaining and adding more details. And I think that stresses just the idea that it's important to really practice this and practice several different versions, right, of who am I? It's important, I think, to be really prepared to hit the highlights, to be personable, to be authentic, and to make sure that your answer kind of hits the mark that they're looking for there. Was that helpful to hear, friends?
Yeah, I think that's just it. It's a hard question, and you're always between, what do I talk about? Everything? What do I run through? What's relevant? I mean, you could start from the very beginning of why you started doing what you're doing and take it 20 years. So I think that's a really helpful way to think about it. Another question that I want to pose to Christine and Claire, and maybe we can start with Christine, is, so another thing that I think a lot of people dread and don't really know how to get started on is just updating your resume, and kind of making sure that it's the most relevant, latest version of what you have going on, but then also making sure that it's, specific enough to a company that it's what they want to see, but that it's also, you aren't making 100 different versions of your resume for every application you submit. How do you think about keeping your resume current? Do you have any best practices, tips that just for making those updates, or even ways to make it less painful when you actually do sit down and start to work on it?
Yeah, I can definitely relate to it being very time consuming and a little bit stressful. So what I've tried to adopt over the last couple of years, like even though I'm not actively looking for a new role, is I try to go into my resume once a quarter, every few months, and just make sure that everything's up to date. Say I've been very fortunate where I've received a couple of advancements at the firm here. So I've made sure to add those as they kind of come up, think about ways to say, frame that on my resume, because even though I have a new title, I'm still doing a lot of the same type of day-to-day work with very similar teams. So it's really a lot about that framing. What I try to do, and especially because I do have a lot of say projects, I know a lot of our external folks do as well. I try to think about some of the more impactful pieces of work I've worked on and really limit, say, maybe a sentence about that piece of work. Say an example is I helped develop a pilot program to implement a cloud monitoring solution to aid product teams in reviewing their cloud spend and usage with the goal of saving the firm 25% on cost savings. I made some of those numbers up, but just think of it that way, because it's a very concise way of putting, say, that large project I worked on, because I know every single number isn't going to be on the resume. I just hit my 10 years out of college, so I feel like I'm okay to get on that second page now. I know that that's a big concern for a lot of folks too. It's how long the resume is. So trying to make sure that it's readable without being a whole novel about your whole career, because I think a lot of it is really just filling those blanks in the interview process. And really just trying to keep it to kind of like you alluded to, Madison. I really try to think about like, what is the job at hand? And if, say, I wanted to, say, apply for a marketing role at a cybersecurity company, for example, I would probably try to tailor my resume to be a little bit more towards the cyber marketing work I've done at the firm versus some of the more broad tech work that I've done. And I really like to kind of have like one, say, source of truth resume that I'll go in and if I say like I said, I'm not applying, but if I were to, like, I can go in and make updates to that and be able to say like, okay, I have this, what can I kind of pick and choose from on the resume and my experience that I want to, say, present myself to this role for. So I really just think being consistent about updating it. Say like I like to do it every like quarter, every few months, just so then that way it's up to date, it's top of mind, and I'm not sitting in December thinking, oh my gosh, what did I do back in March? I don't even remember the clients I've worked on or the projects I've worked on, because I've moved around on so many different projects in the meantime. So just being consistent, I think, helps, and it makes a lot of smaller updates makes it a lot more manageable and less threatening, I feel like, is a good way to put it. Intimidating, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to think about it. I also think it's sometimes hard if you've been in the same job for a long time to think about the actual, the big things that you've done over the course of 5 years, for example. So even just writing down a little snippet that's like, we did this project and it did X, Y, and Z, or this is a big thing that happened. Just making notes of those so that when you look back a couple of years and say, oh, when I look at this 5-year period, what are the 4 or 5 things I really want to call out that I did? I think it's just helpful to keep track of that stuff over time. Another thing that I like to think about is I always have to reread my resume a couple of times and send it around to people to make sure I'm talking about things in a way that I'm clearly saying I did this thing versus saying I kind of worked on it. I want to make sure it's very clear that I had ownership over whatever I was working on, because I think that's something that people usually look for in resumes too. Any thoughts on this, Claire?
Yeah, a quick response to this is that I have 2 to 3 different versions of my resume catered to different types of company that I apply to. This is probably more applicable to people who have a diverse set of work, especially, for example, the integrative people, the business analysts at McKinsey. We got thrown into very different kind of project. You can be in, an oil and gas company one day doing HR work, and then another day you're working with electric car company like me, tearing down, physically like dismantling a car and looking at each part to cause everything. So I would definitely cater everything to the set of company, the categories of company that you're applying to, everything that's most relevant. And echoing, I think what Christine said, definitely focus on make it short and sweet, focus on the impact, for example, and then the leadership, as Madison said. For example, one line could be that this kind of transformation that has 50 million potential impact. I'm just exaggerating. And then my daily task there is ABC. So definitely make it really concise, focusing on your impact ownership. Another point to know is that I know that right now AI is actually reading out all the resume for the companies whoever is applying to. So there might be some tips on how to get filter into your target company before you even land your resume on their desk. A lot of that is like really hitting the targeted keywords that's in the JD. So if there's like one-on-one match on those keywords, it's more likely that you don't get filtered out, that your resume actually get to the people who need to see it.
And I have a couple quick thoughts, if that's okay. So prior to working in recruiting at McKinsey, I also did law school admissions. And I think whether I was looking for a law student or whether I'm currently looking for a future colleague here at the firm, I really like to know the full story, right, of what this person has done. And I think with that point, it's important to remember that you shouldn't discount the experiences that you've had. I think all experience is valuable. My first job was working on my uncle's cattle farm, herding cows. I then worked in a fitting room at a retail store to pay my way through college. And maybe that experience to some people might not be, flashy or, exciting or seem like it's really relevant. I do think though, and I've talked about this in interviews, herding cattle is a lot of hard work. It takes endurance. You have to keep track of many different things going on so that you don't trip over a cow and a cow doesn't trip over you. And so kind of that humorous point aside, I do want to stress that please do not discount the work that you've done, include everything you can, but as different colleagues have noted, make sure that you tailor it a bit. Hope that's helpful there.
Yeah, super helpful. I love that. I love the cattle herding example too. I think as I've progressed through my career, the stuff that's listed on my resume has changed a lot, but it's been everything from being a lifeguard to mopping the floor of a restaurant. I think all of it's relevant. It all tells part of a story, and it's all, an important piece of who you are and what you've worked on. So I know that we've been kind of talking away for a while. I want to open the floor up for questions in 1 minute, but before we move on to questions, I wanted to just ask one last question to our panelists, which is if you could share like one key piece of advice when you think about preparing for interviews, preparing for job applications, your resume, et cetera, storytelling. I guess what is the one kind of takeaway nugget that you would want to share with the group as we think about that entire process? Maybe starting with Christine.
Sure. I actually have a really interesting piece here, which is focus on applying to jobs that you feel like would be a good fit that align to your career interests and goals. So thinking about industry, your location, and career paths, because a lot of companies, especially as you say, grow in your career, you advance in your career, they're really looking for that industry experience. So speaking from experience, if you want to work as a product marketer in tech, you might not get as far if you say apply for a job as a pricing manager in a chemical organization. That was a job I actually did have for about a year, and trying to get back into marketing was very, very tough because of that 1 year of I did a little bit of operations work and I liked the pricing aspect, and then I made that full transition, and it was just so hard to kind of get back onto the track I really wanted to be on. So even though you can say make the transition, it's going to be a lot more difficult if say like if you can say avoid it, and if you can get a job that kind of lets you explore different career path options or a multifaceted role, that's always great. So it's not only just tailoring to your job or say your resume to the job you're applying for, but also for the experience you bring to the table. Because say if like with that pricing manager job, I really had to think, what is the experience I had here that can help and apply to a marketing role that I'm trying to get back into. So definitely think about your overall career goals and your trajectory as you're applying for positions.
Awesome. Claire?
Yeah, thinking about final tips I could give. Is that the question? Sorry, just to repeat,
Yeah.
I lost track. Yeah, in this, I will still refer back to, this current economy and with everything going on, I would say quantity over quality. You definitely need to play the number game. It's like a future, right? If you apply to 200 companies, maybe you get 100, and I will get back to you. And then you get to 10 for like the last round of interview. So definitely in this economy, everything's moving so fast. With everything going on, I think it definitely like prioritizing having a lot of different companies on your radar is better than having a couple very targeted company that you always dream about. You'll be surprised. I actually never thought about McKinsey. I didn't know what McKinsey was, so it's part of my number game. I randomly looked it up, saw this position on LinkedIn, click apply, and then here I am for 2 years.
Awesome. Anna?
I think the tip from my end would be just think bold. It's the number game is important, and you want to apply to many companies, but don't discourage yourself from applying to like big places or like I don't know, a very like a startup where you think you would never fit in, or is like way too cool for you, or a company that is like way too advanced. Sometimes you may get scared or it's just you may think that, okay, it may require way too much preparation if I want to get to the final round, but it doesn't hurt to apply. And then, like, if you're accepted to the next round, then you can just take it step by step. You don't need to basically on every single job description think about like, okay, after 10 years in this company, will we still be happy? Like, will I feel like imposter or whatever? Just get this first step on like applying to a company done, then see who comes back, then like readjust your interview preparation. Which of these companies that basically followed up with you are you most interested in? And then spend most of your time preparing for these roles, and then move on. So it's not a like it's not just like just wanted to sort of reemphasize this point of sometimes it's all right to like end up in a place which you did not particularly like dream about, but don't cut yourself off way too early. Like if you
Love that.
dream about something, just apply there and then like see what happens.
I love that. Yulin?
Yeah, I really want to echo what Anna and Claire just shared. Just dream big. If you think you only fit in, say 3 out of 5 of the qualifications listed on the job description, apply for it. And if you think you are just not qualified for certain things, but you really like it, apply for it. Just apply for whatever you think you like. Don't always think of your qualifications or whether you're going to fit. Then there are that type of questions. If there is a job or certain jobs you really want to do, just try to apply for it and stay connected with the people that who are probably currently working there or who are in the hiring processes. Let them know that you are constantly just progressing and you are always staying interested. So yeah, I really agree with what Anna just shared. Just don't let your fear or your sense of imposter syndrome stop you from applying for whatever you want.
And last but not least, Neffin.
Sure. I think I want to echo the points made, and I'll say simply the easiest way to be rejected from a job is to reject yourself and not apply. And so definitely be open, be brave, and cast a really wide net when you're seeking out an opportunity. I think my final piece of advice, at this point in my career, I've probably read close to 35,000 resumes. I've interviewed probably 3,000 plus people. It's a very human process on both sides, the candidate, the company, the recruiter in the middle. And I think my final piece of advice then is to really just know yourself and be yourself. Remember that it is a very human process. There are people involved. And I think given how many people we on the recruiting side talk to and speak with and all of this, we can tell when someone's being authentic. And it's, first of all, much more enjoyable for us to know that you're being your true self. It's also more fun for you, right, to not feel that you're performing when you're applying for a job. So not to sound like a high school guidance counselor, but know yourself, be yourself, and I think it'll be a much more enjoyable process along the way.
Awesome. I love that. Well, thank you everyone for bearing with us, and thank you to everyone on the McKinsey side for sharing some kind of tips and tricks and thoughts. I just want to now open it up to any questions. Feel free to just speak up. We can do hand raising if we feel like there's multiple people at the same time, but we're all around for any questions. And if you don't have any questions, no pressure either way, but.
And I'm going to actually stop the recording so that people have confidential questions. Let me just stop that.